Hi, you're watching ET Now Spotlight and I'm Alex Matthew. Real estate. It's the one thing that we Indians like to talk about almost as much as gold. And while I admit that that is a cliche, it is also true in a lot of cases. On this show, we're not going to discuss whether or not real estate as an asset is a good investment. Instead, we're going to study the health of the three key segments in real estate, that is residential, commercial, and retail. At the onset though, let's be clear, you can't paint real estate with the same brush, ignore the pun. But what we can do is study it in pockets because there are stories that emerge when you study real estate in silos. Let's first look at the residential space. The fortunes of real estate developers engaged in building residential apartments have been closely tied with the rise and fall of India's COVID-19 cases. A sharp drop in cases after the first wave, coupled with stamp duty reductions by state governments, pushed sales higher in several key markets towards the end of 2020 and in the first quarter of 2021. In fact, a study conducted by consultant Knight Frank in India's top 8 residential markets showed that sales of housing units overall were 44% higher on a year-on-year basis in the quarter ended March. And a large chunk of that increase took place in Mumbai, Pune and Chennai. In fact, the burgeoning demand and apparent return to normalcy gave developers enough confidence to announce new launches. During the first quarter of 2021, over 76,000 units were launched in the top 8 markets. That's 38% higher than the corresponding quarter a year ago. And what's more, it was found that the decline in prices that had been in evidence through 2020 was arrested in 2021. According to Knight Frank, the incidence of freebies and discounts being offered by developers on a case-to-case basis in several markets reduced significantly in the first quarter this year. But the second wave of the pandemic meant that the residential market took 2 steps forward and 1 step back. While data is still trickling in from markets around the country, in Maharashtra, stamp duty collections in May declined by 50% year-on-year. Registrations of property in Mumbai declined by 15% from the low base of last year and as much as 47% sequentially. And most of the sales that did take place were of properties below 1 crore rupees. The slump in sales has brought a clamour for relief, especially for small developers. A survey conducted by industry body Credi between the 24th of May and 3rd of June this year, which polled 4,813 developers from 217 cities, found that an overwhelming number fear project delays and are experiencing labour shortage at project sites. In fact, as many as 83% of respondents said that they were working with less than half the requisite workforce. It was also found that 95% of customers had delayed their decision to buy a house. That is to be expected, of course. Lockdown-like restrictions imposed by all of India's state governments severely limited site visits and registration of property sales. But with restrictions being lifted and going by the signs of pent-up demand in the first quarter of the year, developers are hopeful that a return to normalcy is not too far off.
If the third wave is mitigated because the vaccinations are coming into place, then I think by September, October, November, you're going to see a huge pullback of demand in the season. And Diwali and Christmas, New Year will be really a good season for real estate.
A return to pre-pandemic levels then hinges on the government's efforts to vaccinate India's adult population by the end of the year, and the hope that India is able to avoid a third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic that is as damaging as the second, something other countries have been unable to do. Now, there are some trends that are emerging in the larger markets of our country. The larger developers are getting stronger, consolidating their hold, with individuals preferring to buy nearly finished projects to reduce the chances of a delay in acquisition. Here's my colleague Vivek Iyer with a wrap of all the trends that are emerging in the top 3 markets.
Well, we have been highlighting the kind of resilience, surprisingly so, that the real estate market, especially the residential real estate market in urban areas, has shown ever since September 2020. Some of the reasons can be attributed to various state government decisions to go ahead and reduce transaction charges as well as stamp duty charges. Apart from that, there is also a clear indication that buyers are no longer fence sitters but rather willing to take the plunge. What we've done is we've actually gone ahead and analyzed three major urban markets. We've looked at the Mumbai, Delhi as well as the Bangalore market, and we're understanding what exactly our brokerage is saying and what exactly our industry experts saying when it comes to the real estate market. JP Morgan believes that the Mumbai residential market is showing signs of an upturn after almost a 9-year slumber. They believe that the residential market has started to improve post-September 2020 and fundamentals are looking quite favorable as far as the near term is concerned as well. When you talk about Delhi, what brokerages are saying is that it appears as though the residential cycle has turned a corner for the better. They believe that the larger players will definitely go ahead and enjoy the benefits of market consolidation. However, when it comes to Bangalore, it's actually quite a bit different when you're comparing it to the rest of the cities. The fact that this particular city enjoys a large presence of IT as well as e-commerce companies is something that bodes quite well, given the fact that these companies are doing very well and employees too are thriving. So at this point of time, there's quite a bit of demand. Inventory has been sucked away from the system, and most of the players have actually guided for very strong pre-sales growth going forward. Very interestingly, the real estate sector definitely seems to have turned around as far as 2021 is concerned.
Now, while the larger developers have gotten stronger, the smaller ones have been hit particularly hard by both the waves of the pandemic. And there have been calls from the industry for government, both centre and states, to step in with relief measures. Here's Baman Irani, the chairman and managing director of Rustomjee Group, explaining why that is.
Unfinished building is not only bad for the developer, it is bad for the entire economy. We need to assist every developer to complete what he has started, because if he leaves it unfinished, a lot of financial institutions are losing their money. A lot of purchasers are losing their money. 99 is not complete. It's only when it's 100% done that it's complete. We need to recognize this. We need to support them with whatever is possible. The government can come up with initiatives like, waiver on all the charges that they have paid towards, the various premiums and costs towards getting the FSI in. I think the government can afford to do something that is just absolutely putting the ball out of the boundary in cricketing terms, if I may say, so that there is a strong ability in all of us to be able to kind of support the smaller developers, to support developers in general, complete their buildings on time. The delays have cost them in terms of interest. The delays have cost them, especially in the redevelopment space, in terms of rentals. The delays are costing them in terms of their own manpower costs. The delays are costing them in terms of just having to respond to consumers and continuously communicate, and face many hours of very painful conversations with customers.
So those are the trends as far as the residential market for real estate is concerned, at least in the key cities across the country. But apart from the buying and selling of property, there are changes afoot that could reflect in the renting market for residential real estate. Here's Mubina Kapasi with a report on the Model Tenancy Act and the implications for the sector.
The Model Tenancy Act is one of the most transformative acts introduced by the Union Cabinet and by the government earlier this month since the introduction of RERA. Now, the objective is very clear. They want to encourage owners to put up vacant houses for rent, thus essentially helping that deficit that exists between, in the rental market in particular. It also wants to sort of bridge that trust deficit that exists between tenants and landlords. They've clearly defined the rights and obligations of both the landlord as well as the tenant. So just, to put it in simple terms, one example is that the landlord cannot simply enter the tenanted property at any point of time, he or she has to give a notice of at least 24 hours when doing the same. Structural repairs fall, in the realm of responsibilities of the landlord, but yeah, small repairs have to be carried out by the tenant. On the tenant's part, of course, he or she is not allowed under any circumstances to sublet the property, without the prior permission of the landlord. The landlord additionally also cannot simply increase rents just at his or her own whim. They have to give a proper notice of at least 3 months when doing so. Similarly, when it comes to eviction, that is a similar process that follows. In fact, the very interesting element also that has been introduced is the capping of the security deposit payable by a tenant at just 2 months for residential property and around, I think, 6 months for commercial property. There is also, a force majeure clause that has been put in when the term of a tenancy expires and when a property becomes uninhabitable or a tenant is unable to stay in the rented premises. So the Act says that if the tenancy term is expired or if the neighborhood has been affected by a disastrous event, then subject to requisition by the tenant, the landlord must allow the tenant to stay in the premises for 1 month after the disastrous event. So this is truly transformative, and like I said, it's one of the biggest acts to sort of change the housing market since RERA.
Commercial real estate is the next segment that we're focusing on, and the pushes and pulls in this particular segment are unique. There were reports that emerged after the first wave of the pandemic of office space being relinquished and rentals getting renegotiated. Some companies went so far as to say that their workforce will never entirely come back to the office space. How do things stand after this second wave of the pandemic? I'm joined by Anshuman Magazine, the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of CBRE. And thank you so much, Mr. Magazine, for joining us and for taking the time. I want to start by asking you about the trends that we're seeing right now in the commercial real estate market. There have been reports of maintenance charges being waived, of escalation in rent being put on hold, at least for now. Are rentals being cut though? That is the question.
There is pressure on rentals, there's no doubt, but so far we have not seen a major or significant decline in rentals. The reason is A, it's early days in the whole system of the second wave. B, a lot of leases are locked in. However, like you rightly said, there are landlords who are giving, for example, rent escalations coming up are not being taken up. There could be some other small discounts. But overall, so far we have not seen major, decline in rentals. But we do expect that the pressure on rentals will continue to be there, as obviously because of the market situation.
Now, obviously, you can't paint the entire market with the same brush, right, Mr. Magazine? So, are you seeing in some, so for example, one would say that in the Bengaluru market, a lot of the major corporations that are there are unlikely to give up on office spaces. But are you seeing that companies in certain other markets are giving up on office space and therefore there's more pressure in those markets?
Certainly. I mean, you're right, you're spot on. The larger ones, because of the investment and the scale, they're not giving up. But the medium to smaller offices, no doubt there are pressures on to do cost optimization. And in the process of cost optimization, there will be companies who could relocate the same size of space to a cheaper market, or may reduce the footprint or reduce the office space they require going forward. The thing is that it is, as far as the corporates are concerned, it's not an easy decision for them to strategize going forward, because it's so many, we had the second wave, which was not expected. There's a talk about third wave. So we would know in, I would say, next quarter or so, what are the corporates deciding. But at the mid-level, they would be, and especially in non-prime areas, they would be further. And a lot of landlords, even we've been advising them that if you have a tenant, please renegotiate, try to get the best terms and not let them go, because they could be, because the demand will be slow and there could be further pressure on rentals, no doubt. But it is, I still believe it's early days to actually gauge the full impact, which we would know in 2-3 months' time. But yes, there are markets where the rentals are marginally down, but not significant still. What would one expect? So obviously, I was thinking that because of the second lockdown and what we've gone, there would be a major impact on rentals. That has not happened so far.
Okay. Mr. Magazine, you've been looking at the market for so many years now. Would you say that what we witnessed over the last year in terms of work from home, do you think that it has permanently shifted the landscape of the commercial real estate market, or do you think that it's something that will pass over time? We're seeing certain models emerge, like the flexible model, you've written about it, the hybrid model. Do you think that the emergence of that is indicative of early changes in the commercial real estate market?
See, the fact is there will be more people working out of home than, and I'm talking about India here in specific because the global markets has some other nuances. Even in India, there will be more people working out of home than they did before the second wave or before the pandemic. There's no doubt about that. However, I'm still, I firmly also believe that in a market like India, which has one of the world's youngest workforce, where the houses are still relatively small, where people still live in joint families, where our infrastructure, be it digital or otherwise, is still not up to the mark to international standards, that people will come back to the office. And especially leaving everything aside, the young people, and there's no way you can learn every year. For example, us as a company and many others take many graduates who come straight to the workforce. You can't expect them to say, okay, look, we have hired you, please continue to work from home. The learning happens in offices, the training, the bonding, just the productivity. You cannot get the productivity you can in an office space. So whilst there will be more people working out of home, large majority of the people will be back in the office. Now, talking about the flex space, what you mentioned, no doubt there was a big trend before the COVID hit towards co-working, or what we call flex space, etc. It got impacted by the COVID situation. However, it is again recovering primarily because obviously it gives more flexibility to corporates to decide, at least in the short term and otherwise, that how much space they require, or they may not be sure how much they require. But more importantly, that you're saving on the capex when you're taking flex space. So we do expect more demand on the flex space side going forward, and it will remain, the co-working in the flex space will remain an important part of the market going forward. And it does give corporates more flexibility to decide, especially what they're, at least for gives them time to decide the long-term strategy, and in the short term at least work out of the workspace, flex space or the co-working, and combine both the option of a permanent office and a flex space.
Mr. Magazine, thanks so much for putting all of that into perspective. In fact, laying out how you think that the commercial real estate market will progress, at least in the near term. One can't see too far into the future. Thank you so much for taking the time once again.
Thank you.
Now, let's focus on the third major segment, and that is the segment that perhaps has been impacted the most on account of the pandemic, and especially because of the lockdown-like restrictions that were imposed in the second wave and the full lockdown in the first wave. I'm talking about the retail segment of the real estate market. Here's Priyanka Iyer with a report on the latest from this segment.
What we're largely picking up is that there is no large-scale renegotiation of agreements or rental contracts that is happening across the country. The way that is being adopted by mostly retailers as well as mall owners and landlords is that they're willing to give waivers to the retailers because of the lockdown, the second wave impact that was seen. Now, from our discussions with industry voices, we understand what's happening exactly with malls, and the quantum of waiver that is being given is that during the lockdown, 60 to 75% waiver had been extended by mostly across malls across the country. Then the 2 months after the lockdown, the waiver is reduced to 50%, and 2 to 3 months after that, the waiver is further reduced to 30 to 35%. So there is a gradual reduction in the rental waivers that are being extended. There's no renegotiation of contracts, and this is something similar to what played out last year as well, is what we understand. It also largely depends on the nature of the businesses, and if some mall owners have the capacity that when businesses are completely shut during the lockdown, if they're willing to give 100% waiver as well, they are willing to extend it. Some may not really be able to do so. And at the same time, if there are, for example, restaurants, even if malls open up in the long run with restrictions lifting, restaurants may not be able to open up. So in that case, the mall owners might be willing to give the larger quantum of waivers for a few more months to restaurants as well. We spoke to the Retailers Association of India, we spoke to the Restaurants Association as well, and that is what we are largely picking up, that eventually what plays out is the relationship between the retailers and the landlords, because the landlords too have their own obligations, including taxes, including repayment of loans. So it is a dynamic situation that is playing out across the country. Now, if we take a look at what's exactly happening in high street average monthly rentals, and this is according to ANAROC research data, we understand that there has been a correction in prices in the Jan to March quarter of 2021, if you see in comparison to the Jan to March quarter of 2020. So, average monthly rentals in Khan Market in New Delhi dropped by 8 to 7%. In GK1M block dropped by 13 to 14% year on year. In Mumbai, there was a drop of 5 to 10% in the high street shopping areas. In Bengaluru, there was a drop of 8 to 17%. In Pune as well, there was a drop of 8 to 20%. And lastly, Hyderabad is the only city that is bucking the trend, and the rentals have in fact increased by 7 to 15%. So, largely this is what is playing out. Waivers are what being extended to retailers, but no large-scale renegotiation of contracts.
All right, so now we've presented you with the current status quo for all of the key segments in the real estate market. But how does this space look as a whole as far as investments are concerned, the companies that run real estate? Vikas Khemani, who is the founder of Carnelian Asset Management, is quite bullish on the sector, in fact, not for the next 6 months, but for the next decade. Here's what he said.
Real estate is structurally a very, very big, in a great tailwind, according to me, post RERA implementation, post whatever has happened recently on the regulatory front and the, consolidation which has happened. I think market is clearly getting consolidated. Larger, bigger player will come out and better player will come out, and create opportunity in this space. There's no denial that, real estate demand is going to be here, and COVID has only accelerated. Today, the affordability ratio is, I think, probably close to where it was in 2002-3, right? We have seen prices correcting, prices remaining stagnant for long, incomes going up. So, and we have a significant engine of job creation coming up from IT and manufacturing, and in general, all of them will have a very, very positive impact on real estate. So you are in a situation where the sector has got consolidated, demand booster is there, and this is one of the core sectors which always is very, very critical for economy. So, this is in a way, I would say, I always said that it is very much where capital market was in 1995, post formation of SEBI, a lot of cleanup happened, and, it took off. And we will see real estate probably over the next 10, 15 years will create a significant amount of wealth in different ways. And hence one should look at that perspective when you look at real estate, not from a, what can happen over the next 6 months. But I have no doubt in my mind that 10 years down the line, we will have a very large, significant wealth getting created from the real estate sectors, because the business models are changing, new business models are getting created.
And that's the story right now on the real estate market here in India. Consolidation is a major theme playing out in the residential space, while the low utilization of both office space and in the retail segment are not likely to continue for very long. As soon as we're past the pandemic, things are expected to go back to normal. That's a wrap on this edition of ET Now Spotlight. It's been a pleasure bringing it to you. For the team that put this together, thank you so much for watching. Do stay tuned. This is ET Now.